Welcome, everyone, to our inaugural Boardroom Beyond podcast series. We're very excited to be kicking this off today, and we've got a wonderful guest here, Deborah Ellinger. She's a four-time CEO, a very experienced board director, and on boards like Tupperware, iRobot. She is also on the board of WCD and is the co-chair of our Tampa chapter. Deborah, welcome.
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate being asked to do this, and what fun to be on the inaugural one.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so we thought, as we thought about topics for this, that it would make sense, given we're WCD, to kick off this series with a discussion on women on boards and where are we at in terms of progress and what are some of the issues we're facing today. And I know that you are very committed to this issue, passionate about it, and have been working on several initiatives that I wanted to jump into today. So why don't we start with the obvious question? Why is progress slowing at this point? We're seeing the exact opposite of what we want to see right now in terms of the pace of change and progress.
Yeah, well, I mean, the good news is there's still progress. It's just not the same rate of change as it was. And maybe I should just start with a little bit of data, because I've been looking at the data a lot here in Florida, but across the US as well. And the data I'm going to use is the Russell 3000 board data, because that helps us look at both, large companies, small companies, et cetera, and look at trends. So just very quickly, when I say that there has been progress, it was in 2017, we were at 16%. 2 years later, it was 22%. 2 years later, it was 26% by 2021. And by that, it's the percent of board seats that are held by women. So it got to 26% in 2021, and then it suddenly started to slow. So we are around 29% at the moment, just kind of getting to the 30% point, but it's now increasing, 1% a year instead of 2%. So what's happening, in my view, we're at just shy of 30% with every company, but it's larger for, Fortune 500. What I think we're seeing in the data is that it used to be like one and done. Get one woman on the board, we're done. And then people said, you know what, having got one, it actually helps if you have two. So then we got to two and done. And now in most of the US, it's three and done. And that's where it's stalled out. Just over 50% of US the Fortune 500 have 30-some%. In Florida, where I am and why we're focusing on Florida, is we seem to have stopped at two and done. And what's going on there? And I think just at the moment, we're seeing some pushback against gender diversity, ethnic diversity, and all those other things. And so we've stalled out. I think that's what's happening. And just one last thought about what's going on, Jennifer. I don't know about you, but I get lots of guys who say I can't get on a board because they only want women and they only want ethnically diverse people. And the reality is that more than 50% still go to men. And in Florida last year, it was actually 65% went to men, 35% to women. So, our percentage will increase slightly from our current 26-ish, but it's slow. I hope that answers your question.
I couldn't agree more. I have heard that. It's a complete myth, this idea that, men can't get on boards, but, it's out there, certainly. And I have, unfortunately, been in conversations with men as they talk about board renewal and heard that, well, I have three. Like that was the end game all along. And so I do think that narrative was one we really need to change. But it certainly it's difficult right now in terms of the environment, depending which state, which country you're in. Certainly in the US. What do you think we can be doing? I know you've got an initiative in Florida right now, and I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, well, it's actually kind of cool. We got together with, and it's not just WCD, so it's WCD, all of the chapters in Florida, but also the International Women's Forum, 50/50 Women on Boards. We have our NACD colleagues helping out from time to time, even if not officially a part of the initiative. There are various other women's leadership groups here. And we got together and sponsored the University of Tampa to do a census so we could actually see the numbers, see the trends, and get real data that you can't argue with. And then we're using it to actually reach out to every single Florida company that has less than 3 women on their boards, and then offer to introduce them to qualified women. So, if they are in the industrial sector and they want a qualified financial expert, we can find them one. In fact, we can probably find them 10. Because there is no shortage of qualified women for these positions. I mean, that's the other myth. They think they aren't there, but the pipeline is really, really deep. And when these companies ask for help, they're pleasantly surprised, and we have been successful in getting women on Florida boards when they've asked. And that's the challenge, is to get them to ask. It's all about networking.
Yeah. And so what is the most common reaction you get when you're reaching out to these CEOs in terms of, you've said, well, they didn't think there was any out there, we don't exist, we're all unicorns. Or what else? I'm just curious the type of feedback that you get generally when you approach CEOs
Yeah,
or
well,
chairs.
I will give you an example. There's a company we approached which had no women on their board and was in the medical device business. And I was very fortunate. Their CFO actually was a new CFO who'd come from California, was kind of himself thinking, well, why aren't there any women? Just at the time when I reached out. And so we chatted. And what they wanted was somebody with medical device experience who had FDA and regulatory experience. And so we went out and we found 10 names. And he then showed them to his CEO. And then I got on the phone with the CEO. And lo and behold, through that networking, it wasn't actually one of those first 10. It was somebody that one of the 10 then recommended, who's now a member of WCD Tampa. He met her, loved her. And from the time that I reached out to her joining that board, I think it was only 3 or 4 months. Well, you asked about the reaction. The reaction was, well, from the CFO was, oh, that was easier than I thought.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So maybe not a unicorn, maybe there are qualified women. And the reaction from the CEO was kind of funny, which was, yeah, it was never about women in the first place. We were just looking for qualified candidates.
Interesting. Yeah, I hope that the narrative around, everybody has to have been a CEO in that industry when, there's a board search out there, it is going away as we think about the complexity of the different skill sets we now need on boards relative to maybe 15, 20 years ago. But is that your experience, or do you still get a lot of that?
Well, you do get a lot of that. And that's part of what we can do to help as both board members and as people talking to board members, is really get them to focus on the qualification, not the title. And I think that's really, really important. And I would say, as a chair of nominating and governance, which is what I have been on most of my boards, I make sure we get the spec straight. And I encourage all of you, everyone, get on nominating and governance, and then make the discussion be about the qualifications, not, I know this person and he's good and he's the CEO of such and such. It really needs to be about qualifications, and that's what will change the game, in my view.
Yeah, and I often find too, as we fill out skills matrix, depends on the board you're on, but sometimes people check a lot of boxes they don't necessarily have, and you actually have gaps in that skill set that you really need to analyze. One thing I wanted to talk about, because I know we've chatted about this in the past, is progress on leadership roles. And, how are we doing in terms of chairs? We know progress there is glacial in terms of chair of the board. Some progress on chairs of committee, not enough. What's your perspective on that? And how do we encourage women to put themselves in a position where they're going to get those roles going forward?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's absolutely critical. And as I just mentioned, nominating governance is, in my view, the place to be. Although if you're chair of audit, you probably think that's the place to be. And if you're the comp chair, you like that. But nom and gov is where you can actually make change happen in terms of future board qualifications and membership. So don't wait to be asked. That's my first thing, is ask to be on nom and gov. And then every time you're looking at board composition, make sure that you reach out to, post it on WCD, reach out to your network to find and put forward, 5 or 10 women's names to hold up against the 5 or 10 men's names that the rest of the board is going to come up, so that it becomes a discussion of qualifications and there's women in the mix. So I think that's important. Getting a chair position, usually you don't become a chair right out of the gate. You just need to get onto the board that you can contribute, the committee you can contribute to. And then ask, put yourself in the position, do the work, show them that you understand what's needed. And in a number of cases for me, I became Nom and Gov chair, even though it was previously the lead director or the chair, because often Nom and Gov is run by the same person. And then I was doing the work. And so eventually they said, oh, why don't you just become chair? And we separated it. So just don't wait to be asked is my point, I think. Just keep putting your name out there. And honestly, women do the work.
We're good at that.
Yeah, we're good at that. Women are really diligent. So, put your hand up and say you can do it.
Yeah, absolutely. It certainly has been my experience that when changes take place in those leadership roles, a lot of times there wasn't a lot of discussion with everybody. It just kind of changes. And so you have to put your hand up so people actually know you're interested when it happens.
Right. Actually, one of these we've done on each of my boards is when we do the annual assessment, when we look at how somebody's performing and we get feedback, the 360 feedback from the rest of the board members and sometimes also from the executive team, we ask people to fill in their own assessment as well and to mark down what they are interested in terms of board, which committees they'd like to be on and whether they'd like to be chair and how long do they want to stay on the board. So we do specifically ask those every year for the companies where I'm Nom and Gov chair.
Yeah, it's really important. I wanted to shift gears a little bit to another initiative that you have underway, and that is your Women of Color Pipeline initiative in Florida. Fantastic work that you're doing, so wanted everyone to know about it.
Sure. So first of all, shout out to Lauren Valiente here in Tampa, who leads that for us. And we modeled our initiative on the initiative in Minnesota. So you should ask them about it as well. WCD Minnesota has been doing this for a few years. We started 2 years ago, and what we did, we're on our second cohort now, but each year we identify 12 women of color in our community who are ready for board service. And by that, I don't mean just interest, I mean really ready. They are CFOs of public companies, they are chief operating officers, they own a large P&L, maybe they have supply chain, they're running a division. And so they're women of color who are incredibly impressive. And honestly, they're not hard to find. We actually had to narrow it down to 12. We put out a call for candidates, and lots of people were interested and nominated all sorts of interesting women. And we've got 12 amazing women, yet again this year. And the cohort from last year, one of them's already on a public company board now, and we've got 2 who are interviewing for board positions. So what we do is bring them in, and they go through a 6-month program once a month. They learn about board service, they sharpen up their bio, they develop their elevator pitch, and they figure out as well which companies to go after, because it's still about networking. Most of these positions are not filled by recruiters. Only 30% of board positions are filled by recruiters, and that's for the large companies. So most of it's networking, and we teach them how to do that. And then we get local companies to sponsor each month. We actually did one last night. We had our first kickoff for this year at Primo Water, and their CEO came and spoke to the group and talked about his board and how he thinks about women on boards. So it's fun, and a lot of our women corporate director members also come because you actually never stop learning. As you learn what it's like for these 12 in the cohort program, you also learn for yourself.
That's excellent. I heard it was a great session, by the way. So I think very impactful and, getting great feedback. And so nice to see results so quickly with the initiative too, just as we have seen in Minnesota too. So any advice for those who are looking to try and get that diversity onto their boards in terms of seeking out candidates?
Well, I mean, the first thing is just being willing to look. So if you are a member of a board and you're not very diverse ethnically, there are actually really good qualified women locally, but also tap into like the Latin Corporate Directors Association. There's a Black Women Corporate Directors Association. Go reach out to them, and they will have candidates for you. There's not a pipeline issue here. This is my main message. There's plenty of qualified women and women of color. You just have to know where to look.
Yeah, and I speak obviously to those counterparts regularly, and I know they have lists at the ready for when they get those calls. So the people are out there. It's just making some.
Well, and I would add, so I've been a part of a group in Boston, although I'm in Tampa now, but in Boston, a group that we call ourselves the last mile, which is that last connection to get women onto boards. And we put all of our names into a database. They're all women that we know personally. There's 800 of them in our database right now. And if you say to me, I want, a CFO with industrial experience, or I want a former, a cybersecurity expert or whatever, we can find them. So if you're looking for women, do that. And of course, reach out to WCD. And I know, Jennifer, you're working on how to really build a good database and improve this with as and when you get Salesforce implemented with WCD. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Yes, so am I. I think we really want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to maximize opportunities for our network. And it's actually a good segue because I wanted to ask you a bit about your commitment to WCD. You clearly have a passion for this organization and have done so many wonderful things for it. So just wanted to get your perspective on, why WCD?
Well, first of all, I do love WCD, and it's been incredibly helpful to me. I joined WCD in Boston after I joined my first board, which was, as I say, it was more than 20 years ago. So I've been a member for a long time. And I think the reason why I've stayed as a member and why I enjoy it so much is really about the community and having somebody to talk to. Because honestly, you bump into all sorts of issues as a woman director. Back then, I was the only woman and the first woman on my first board. And then later on, trying to figure out how to get into those committee positions. And then just basic stuff like, you do get talked over sometimes. How do you handle it? What's a good way to deal with it? Plus, I really enjoy the in-person dinners that we do. We've got 50 members here in Tampa, and I love all of them. They're great people. They spend their time, they're passionate about this as well. There's just nothing like the community that we have at WCD.
Yeah, I really think that's the glue. I mean, I think we have lots of good content and speakers, but that network is pretty special. And I'm very fortunate to spend time in those rooms with wonderful women. And Deborah, I just want to thank you for all that you're doing for WCD and for our members, and also for being on the board, of course, of WCD, and for being here today with me. It's been great to have you, and a great way to kick off this podcast series.
Well, it's a pleasure, and thank you for everything you do for WCD, and thank you, WCD, for everything it's done for me. So I don't think I'd be where I am without WCD.